being
Okay, great. Welcome, Dorothy, KM, and others who are joining us and will continue to join us. Welcome. My name is Casey Reason, and I am right now acting as host this evening. And for those of you listening in at a later time, welcome as well. We are delighted to have you join us and delighted to have you be part of this dynamic community this evening. We are very lucky this evening to have a special guest speaker with us who's going to talk to us about a brand new book he has out called The Novice Advantage, and it's Dr. Jonathan Eckert. We're going to introduce him in just a moment, but before we begin, I'd like to make sure that as everyone is getting started here, we get a perspective on who's bringing this event to us tonight. So this event is being hosted by the NEA, and specifically folks who are leading up ed communities. And if you haven't had a chance to check out ed communities, I'm not going to bog the meeting down with a lot of introductions about that community. But ed communities is a community of practice open to all educators that's designed to bring educators together, not unlike what we're doing tonight. Bring educators together in a virtual asynchronous learning space where we can share ideas, share resources, and really continue to advance the work of our profession and really bring some of the best ideas and best perspectives to our professional practice and to the children we serve. So the NEA and Ed Communities is a sponsor for this event. Also, Corwin Press, a publisher who has been very supportive of this initiative and supported the work of Dr. Eckert. Corwin Press is also here supporting us and help bring us Jonathan tonight. And also the University of Toledo. The University of Toledo is my home space, and we have a Center for the Advancement of Professional Learning Communities and Virtual Collaboration. And we really exist to try to create these kinds of dynamic learning spaces and to support them. So these three entities really are working together, and we'll be promoting this event through various arteries associated with their work to really get the word out for these monthly events. If you like what you hear tonight, we will be having in Ed Communities a space for you to make a contribution and to ask questions as we post information from tonight's webinar. And we just hope that you enjoy it, and we hope it leads to gives you an opportunity to grow and expand your sensibilities. So. And I'd love to hear from our guests this evening who have joined us, some of which names I can see, some that I can't. I'd love to hear where you're calling in from or where you're portaling in from. We'd be delighted to know where you're coming in from tonight because we tend to have a pretty good reach. This is a nationwide presentation. So we'd love to know where you're coming from. We've got folks from Missouri, folks from Washington. So we're glad to have everyone here. So let's jump in. I want to make sure that we are indeed giving our guests the time we need to get started here. Our guest speaker is a professor at Wheaton University. Dr. Eckert is the author of The Novice Advantage, a fearless practice for every teacher. And Wheaton University is in Wheaton, Illinois. Dr. Eckert is taught and coached at the middle school level in Chicago and in Nashville. He got his doctorate at Vanderbilt University. He was a teaching ambassador fellow with the U.S. Department of Education. He worked under both the Bush administration and the Obama administration and worked on issues in teacher quality and really working on initiatives nationwide to improve teacher quality. His specialization is he works on trying to create, working with policymakers, trying to improve and create supporting the interaction of teachers in the service of learning. And really advancing teacher preparation, and specifically in his area of interest is science education. What's really cool about John is that he continues to teach. If you check out some of his videos online and read about him, he's not one of those professors that only works with adults. He still goes back into the classrooms and works with students, so he stays connected to the kids that I know he's so close to and thinking about their service. So John, we're really pleased to have you here tonight, and we're looking forward to the evening. We're going to ask John. John's going to give us a little preview for about 20 minutes or so about his content and tell us a little bit about the book. I'm going to follow up with a few questions, and then we're going to throw it open to our audience. So as you're going along here tonight, we'd love everybody to listen and think about some questions you might want to ask. And as I said, after the presentation, I'll ask a few questions, and then we're going to open it up to all of you. We'd love to hear your questions and allow you to engage directly with an author. So this is a great way to bring works like The Novice Advantage to life. It's a great way for you to experience this content and interact right with the author to hear what he was thinking about when he jumped into this. And John, I'm going to turn to you. I love the cover. Corwin does a great job of coming up with covers. I love the kids on this cover. I know they do a great job of being creative. Can you tell me, and I'll turn it over to you. I know you have an intro plan, but I wanted to know, how did you come up with the title, The Novice Advantage? And I'm particularly interested in fearless practice. I love that notion of a courageous instructor. Can you tell me about that?
Sure. Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks for the introduction. The cover, that was about I think it was the 15th iteration of a cover that we worked on. I don't know if I know you've published a number of books, Casey, so I don't know how much back and forth there's been on that, but we went back and forth, and they were great. They were very patient with me as I tried to communicate what I wanted to the cover. We were trying to figure out some way that communicated the fearlessness of being new at something, almost like you don't know enough to be afraid. You're just jumping in, and so this seemed to communicate that, and we kind of like the free nature of that, and it brings back the kind of memories from childhood that kind of have the energy that I was trying to convey in The Novice Advantage. The title came from an article that I'd written in Kaplan a couple of years ago, which is why Corwin had contacted me. It was Teach Like a Novice, Lessons for Beginning Teachers, and so I had 7 lessons from observing student teachers and being new that I come up with. And we didn't end up going with the Teach Like a Novice thing because it was fairly hackneyed with Teach Like a Pirate and Teach Like a Champion and all that. We didn't really want to go down that road. So The Novice Advantage stuck because what we wanted to communicate is that there are advantages to being new, and that newness happens throughout the course of the career. It's not just being new. There's obviously huge disadvantages at times to not knowing what you don't know, but there were benefits to it, so that seemed like a good starting place. And then the fearless practice flows out of that. So as you get into the book, it gives processes and mindsets that comes out of Carol Dweck's work and other people's work that can be applied directly to the teaching profession. So that's really what we're looking at. Communities like this one, what NEA is supporting here, what I know you do at the University of Toledo, this is the kind of work that we're talking about doing, whether it's in person or virtually. It's accelerating our learning curve by learning with each other and being free to ask questions and admit where we don't know things so that we can get better together.
That's really cool. And honestly, Corwin is great about that. Corwin, if you see a Corwin book, they really do allow the author to have input. That isn't the case in many places. And so when you look at a picture of a cover of a Corwin book, they have given us input. So that's really cool. That's really cool, John. I think you made a good choice here.
Yeah, thanks. It was mostly their creative genius. I just said yes or no, so I'll give them the credit on that. All right, so you were going to jump in and just start going through a few things, or did you have anything?
Absolutely, Josh. You're ready. Yeah, go right ahead, man. I'm good.
Sure. So the question, and whenever I do these, I do a lot of this in workshop form, so we lose a little bit of that online, but I think you pick up a little bit of it. So the first slide that you see here, this was a picture that was taken of me by the office manager in our teacher-educator program. This was in May of 1996. So this was just months before parents were going to be dropping their 5th graders off to spend their day with me as their teacher. And the question that always comes to mind is, why would you want to go back to this? I mean, if this isn't the ultimate novice teacher look, I don't know what is. I mean, I was 21 years old when that picture was taken. I looked maybe like I was 14, and that shirt appears to be 3 sizes too big. But the issue there is there was a lot of energy that I had. I knew that I had a lot to learn, but I was ready to jump in with both feet and spend as many hours as it took to do the best job I could for my students. And luckily, parents didn't turn around with their kids and walk home when they saw this was going to be their kid's teacher. At least, you can't tell in the picture, I was 6 feet 4 inches tall, so at least I had the height working for me. But in that picture, you know, I could be a middle schooler, and I was actually teaching fifth graders in my beginning job. So why would you want to go back to that? And so in the book, it's filled with a number of stories of great teachers that I've come across in my now 21 years in education. And so I had the privilege of telling those stories. There are a number of stories from my practice. Very few of them are anything that could be deemed a how-to book. Most of the things from my practice are somewhat cringeworthy. And so the first chapter is about cringeworthy moments. Why would you want to be a novice? And so I break those stories down throughout the book to communicate that I'm not trying to say I've figured all this out. I've worked with a lot of people that have figured a lot of things out, and I take research and those experiences and bring them to bear on the book. But one of the things that I do at workshops is I have these 5 pictures up on the screen, and I tell someone in the audience, and that can be tonight if somebody wants to type in the chat window, any one of these 5 pictures represents some story from the book that begins to communicate some of the ideas in the book and how you would approach fearless practice around these. So if somebody, anybody, or Casey, you can feel free to pick. If you have any of these 5 stories, I can jump in with and give you a quick 2 to 2.5 minute story about being a novice, which might have happened at the beginning of my career. One of these stories is from 11 years in. So I was not really a novice by most other standards, but it definitely represents that. So it looks like Kay-Ann might be typing something in. She's saying the bus. Okay. So the bus story, if you've ever been to Chicago, which I see we've got people from California, Missouri, D.C., I know Casey's in Ohio. But if you've ever been to Chicago, we are 25 miles directly west, which is where I was teaching. And so to get in, you take the Eisenhower Expressway. And the Eisenhower is usually locked up and very slow moving. But this day we were going into the Field Museum. I was going in with my 5th graders, and we were riding along. Everything was going smoothly. The bus was cruising along the Eisenhower about 50 miles an hour. So it's bouncing around as it usually does. And I look back to the back of the bus, and I see one of my toughest kids in about the middle of the bus who's turning that color of green that every teacher knows. You know that things are not going to go well for that kid and his stomach. And I was in the front of the bus. There was a trash can by me, but I could tell by the looks of this student that I was not going to make it back with the trash can, and he was not going to be holding down his breakfast much longer. So I got a little bit desperate, and I just yelled from the front of the bus to him to just lean your head out the window. So he takes his head, leans out the window, and if you know anything about science, and as a science teacher I should have known this, that he did release the contents of his stomach out the window, but with the bus going 50 miles an hour, that comes right back in the next 4 windows onto and just happened to be 4 girls in the 4 seats directly behind him, at which point there were 4 more students that had that kind of greenish colored look. Luckily, we did not have any more breakfast produced. But it was just one of those times where you're like, oh, what was I thinking? Like, that was just not a good plan. And so in the book, sometimes these stories are redeemed with the revision that you realize, okay, that was a mistake. I could revise it and fix it. That one's just one of those, we're just not going to replicate that. We're just going to reject that idea. We're not going to do that again. And so you can't have any shame about that. You deal with it and you move on. And so if you've been a teacher, you know that place where you've made that mistake and you feel bad, and 4 girls behind the student who had the problem definitely experienced my mistake. But you just make the mistake and move on. So that leads us to what the novice mindset actually is. And so in the book, I build on a lot of other people's work that have done great stuff before me. So as you read the book, if you've read Carol Dweck's mindset, you'll hear echoes of that in the book as we take that growth mindset that we apply to students and we apply it to teaching. Learning to Improve is Tony Bright's book and the Carnegie Foundation's book about how schools get better together through networked improvement communities, which is a lot of what we're doing here, but it's actually more systemic. So how do you share information? How do you gather data and move from there? Outliers has a lot of stuff there about how expertise is developed. I certainly don't want teachers, the student teachers that I work with, the beginning teachers that I work with, I don't want them to stay novices indefinitely and that they don't know things, but I want them to have that fearless kind of fresh perspective on things. Daniel Pink's Drive, talking about autonomy that comes with competence and that increased desire for autonomy as you spread your expertise and grow with other people. Rookie Smarts was a book by Liz Wiseman that was, she's also written for Corwin, but it's a business book about the advantages of being new and how quickly you can add to your knowledge when you're willing to admit you don't know things and enlist the help of other experts. And so she lays out different ways that novices have advantages over people. And then if you see right next to that, I have linked to it, Atul Gawande's book, Better, how you look at your errors, and that's how you improve in the medical field. It's a really fascinating book that has nice application in education. And then Brene Brown's Daring Greatly is about vulnerability and how we overcome shame to grow and do great things. That's where a lot of the fearless practice part comes from. Dan Willingham's a cognitive scientist at University of Virginia, Why Don't Students Like School? Love this book and how we have to look in transparent ways about what works and doesn't work in school. The last chapter of the book gets into this immunity to change work that Keegan and Leahy, or two faculty members at Harvard, have spent their careers figuring out why people are immune to change. And I just love the ideas there, so I've applied it to this expert novice map piece that we'll talk about here at the end. Visible learning, John Hattie. There's a lot of good stuff that's applied in chapters 4 through 7 of the book where we just take those ideas and build those out. Then Angela Duckworth's Grit, the power of passion and perseverance, which very much is the case for all the great teachers I know, that their passion leads them to persevere. And then How People Learn, which is the seminal text that really changed a lot of the ways I teach in the college classroom and also the way I taught in middle school, which is when I read that at that point. So that comes through. So those are the books that kind of undergird. There's more to the research, but those are some of the main ones that undergird what I'm talking about. The Novice Mindset, I can give it to you briefly. The definition is it's continuous growth through fearless, deliberate practice. If you read the expertise literature, it differentiates deliberate practice from just practice, that, practice leads to experience, deliberate practice leads to expertise, deliberate practice being the kind of practice where you get feedback and you reflect on the work that you're doing, and that's how you move forward. And so that can happen at the beginning of your career. It can happen over, 30 years in your career. So I highlight 3 archetypes of novices. There's the beginner, which everyone's familiar with. There's the experienced novice, who is in this case, she's a 30-year teaching veteran of kindergarten, but every year is new for her, and she approaches everything with this newness, which was enviable. She had energy as a 60-year-old that I didn't always have as a 22-year-old. Then there's the perpetual novice, that person, and people like this who they're constantly seeking out new opportunities. They're the kinds of people that seek out these kinds of opportunities like we have here. They're the ones that take on leadership work that just needs to be done. They see a problem, they take it on. They take on the coaching roles. They step out of their classroom to help other teachers, but that's how they stay new. And so I highlight a great teacher, Bobby Sarisa Houchins, who I worked with at the U.S. Department of Ed, who's constantly living that out. And so then I have 6 markers that lay this out: hopefulness, persistence, resilience, curiosity, playful innovation, and opportunistic learning. And that's what makes up the mindset of those beginners, and that's where the advantage comes from being a novice. So that slide lays out largely the first couple chapters of the book, and it kind of gives you a sense of where I'm headed with the rest of the book. So, Casey, I'll stop there for a minute. Do you have any questions, anything you want to follow up on, or should I just keep moving forward?
I think why don't you go ahead and keep moving forward, because I think hopefully we're getting into the content, and I hope our audience continues to gather some ideas. But keep going right ahead. It sounds great.
Sure. So then this is straight from Dweck's work, the fixed mindset versus the novice mindset. And so what I've done, so in her conception, it's growth mindset. I'm just taking it and moving it into just a teaching perspective. And so I'll just highlight a couple of these on the screen. I know you guys are capable of reading, but this is a few of them are really, I think, powerful shifts in the way we really think about these things. Because it's easy to say these things on a slide. It's harder to apply them. When we have a fixed teaching mindset, when we approach our teaching with this fixed mindset, we try to avoid struggle. When you have that novice teaching mindset, struggle is an opportunity for growth. When you're new as a teacher, you know, or you're new to a role, or you've taken on a new task, you know it's going to be hard, but you realize you're going to grow through it. That sometimes gets harder as you've been in a position for a while and you feel like you can't be vulnerable and admit that you're struggling with something or that something's hard because you're supposed to know how things work. Let's see. Let me go down a few there. Compliance and fear drive my work in that I have to do this for the standardized assessment, or I'm doing this because of accountability things. I have to do this. That's a very fixed view of it, where the novice teaching mindset is creativity and courage drive the work. And so that is a shift that I think is important to see. Teaching can become stale with a fixed mindset, but if everything's new every day and you're approaching your curriculum through the eyes of your students and how they're viewing it, how they're learning, teaching never really gets boring. And then the last one, change induces fear and should be avoided. That's not really the way you approach something when the classroom's changing all the time. I know Casey had written a book that I just read a few parts of that Stop Leading Like It's Yesterday. All right, we can't go backward into something that doesn't exist anymore. Change is going to happen. But the novice mindset doesn't say all change is good. If you read the last one on the right there, change can be embraced if it's in the best interest of my students. Sometimes we have to say no to things, but we don't just say no to things because it's change. We say no to things if we know it's not the best interest of our students, or we take and modify it so that it works for our students. And I think that's an important difference between the fixed teaching mindset and the novice teaching mindset. So in the end, we live in the reality that we live in. And so I have this quote, which is kind of a daunting one in the first chapter, where it talks about Nancy Atwell, who had just received what was a $1 million teaching prize, kind of being kind of characterized as the Nobel Prize for teaching. If you know Nancy Atwell, she's a literacy guru. I read her in my own methods classes when I was being prepared to teach. And she had this very dark description of public schools, that public school teachers are so constrained right now by the Common Core and the tests that are developed to monitor what teachers are doing with them. If you're a creative, smart young person, I don't think this is the time to go into teaching. And so there's some truth to this, but if you're going to have the novice mindset that I'm proposing, we can't really approach teaching in that way. And unfortunately, sometimes schools are, and colleagues in schools are their own worst enemies. And so Dan Duke has coined the phrase the crab bucket culture of schools. That I've never been crabbing. I'm not on the East Coast. It doesn't look like with Missouri and Napa, California, and others that we have necessarily anybody that's gone crabbing. But from what I understand, there's no need for a lid on a crab bucket because not only do the crabs not help each other out of the bucket, if one starts to make it up the side, the others pull it down. And so often when we have teachers that try something innovative and new or are recognized for something, others can tend to pull them down out of defensiveness, out of the fear and compliance-driven nature of schools at times. If there's not a strong principle that's kind of helping to facilitate that culture, it can be really negatively egalitarian, and so that can be an issue. I see this a lot of times with student teachers going in who their cooperating teachers will tell them, hey, you forget what you learned in your classes. That is kind of a naive view. Once you've been here a while, you'll understand how it really works. And it's this norming that doesn't do anything to inspire the kind of optimism that marks and hopefulness that marks the novice mindset. The last thing I share in there is about venting, and I really work with beginning teachers on this, and this is more for me than anything else. When I'm venting, I try to ask myself a few questions to make sure what I'm doing is productive. the questions are, what am I venting about? Who did I seek out to vent to? And did I seek someone out that is going to just confirm my negative opinions of things and then make that a solid, now I've just reinforced the negative view I had of that person or that idea? Or did I seek someone out that's going to challenge me to think about something different and reframe the possibilities from that? And so all of that leads to this kind of a different perspective on teaching that I think we need. This model is what I just call it the 4 R's because it's easy to think through what it is. Ultimately, we do this all the time when we're teaching. We reflect on things that are a challenge to us. And sometimes it's an immediate reflection. So I had a kid on a bus who's going to throw up. My quick reflection is, okay, we don't want that in the bus, so stick your head out the window. So I took a risk, told him to do that. When I reflect on that again, I realized that was a bad idea. I should reject it. Don't feel bad about it. It was not a great idea. Learn from it. Don't do that again. Most of the time, though, we can take that idea and either revise it and make it better or just use it again. And so the double loop continues, and that just continues through the cycle there on the right. On the left, you see the personal learning network. I know Casey's done a lot of stuff with PLCs, and they're definitely a huge component of a personal learning network. But this is a bigger idea than that, in that the personal learning network is everything that encompasses who and what you learn from, and then who and what you share with. So these are school colleagues, in your school, beyond school colleagues, so like the people we have on tonight, and then your professional library. What research, what resources do you tap into? So when we reflect, we tap into that. The bigger the risk we're going to take, the more we should tap into it. So if you're going to change your entire classroom management structure for your class, probably not a good idea to just do that on the fly. You should probably do some digging and talking and seeking out information before you make a big switch. But the other thing I always encourage teachers to do is to share back with that personal learning network. Whether you have successes or failures, you need to give back based on what you found works and doesn't work, and that's how we grow and spread our expertise together. So I had this built in. I always like to do this whenever I share or people have read my book. They always come up with 5 or 6 even better stories than I have, and I think this is a useful thing. If anybody feels like, Casey, this can be you, or if anybody wants to jump in and share a mistake they've made, we can then kind of build from there with some of your examples. So if you don't mind, I'll just turn it over to you. It probably would be easier. You can type in, or Casey, I don't know how you want to handle this, but go ahead.
Well, I see. I love the opportunity, and I believe me, I have plenty, but it looks like we have multiple folks typing away. So I think if we are patient enough, I think you're going to get a couple of novice mistakes that are going to erupt on the screen here in a moment, because we do have multiple friends here giving us some examples, because you've undoubtedly inspired an opportunity to share. So that'll work.
Well, and this is always one of the best ways when I do professional learning with teachers, and I do workshops, whether it's 20 people or 150 people. This breaks down a lot of barriers really quickly. Like sharing with your mistakes and with that vulnerability, that then makes people feel freer to just jump in with other things that are challenges that they're willing to share. So, because everybody can relate to this. Let's see, we got Dorothy here. I teach resource math. I wanted them to play Math Wars, which is basic math drills and basic operations. The kids ended up getting in arguments about cheating, and many had emotional breakdowns because they lost the war. That is awesome, Dorothy. I can definitely relate to that. I have a whole section in the book on how to run games well, and that those lessons, there's 10 of them, are hard-won lessons from things like that. That's a great one. Looks like Kay Ann's in as well. She has 8th graders threw dozens of paper airplanes out my 3rd floor windows, which I allowed each guilty student to choose one of 2 punishments. They chose different ones, and they were unequal. All right. Very good. Very good. You live and learn on that. That's very good. It looks like Brandy might be typing something in as well.
John, do you have a paper airplane example in your book?
I do not have a paper airplane. I did a ton of paper airplanes, but no, the worst. when I was in 7th grade and in Ohio, I was in Ohio in 7th grade when I was a student, we had a brand new teacher that we took total advantage of, and some guys had her classroom library was up on the front right of the room, and some guys started passing books back, and they were throwing the books out the 3rd floor window. They emptied her entire shelf before she realized what had happened. And she went out and she looked out the window and saw all of her books on the floor, and she just started crying. So I don't know if that's worse than the paper airplanes, but I wasn't even involved, and I felt bad. So Brandy's got one, right? Let's see. She had a kindergarten student crawl through a hole in the fence and go home during recess, and she didn't know they were missing. Oh, that's hard. All right, good one. Kindergarten teachers are saints. So, Brandy, I feel your pain there. So, in the end, this next slide kind of is the growth toward expertise. You take the mindset, you apply the process, let it affect your practices, and you just keep looping forward. It's this iterative process, and we just keep growing, and that's why teaching never gets old and is fun. So this is one of the questions I ask, and I don't know exactly how we want to share this. We might be able to jump into this when Casey starts asking questions, but there are places where we learn a lot as educators, and getting into that sweet spot is important, and recognizing what allows us to grow the most, what kinds of leadership from principals, from colleagues, in schools, where we grow the most is something to just keep considering. Because in the end, what we have to do is we have to find joy in teaching, what makes us, what gets us up in the morning. And so this was an article from Ed Week earlier this year that I'd written, and the first sentence sounds extremely narcissistic, but in the end, this is what I think this is true. We have to find our enjoyment as teachers is a precondition for student engagement. It's not enough. I mean, I could be enjoying what I'm doing and no one else is, but if I'm not enjoying what I'm doing in my class, it's going to be very hard for me to get students engaged. So the first line of the article was, I teach to entertain myself. And so ultimately, for 20 years, that's what I've done because, and Parker Palmer always says things way better than I can, in his blog that he had on Being in December of last year, he wrote about being a novice as a way to get unstuck and how he finds joy in his work. And so he has this quote, "To get unstuck, I must let go of my career as an established writer and begin again as a novice. In truth, I'm a novice in every new moment of the day, each of which presents possibilities unknown and untried." So I just love that take on being new. He's responding in his blog to a poem which basically asserts that if we're not beginning, then we're dead. And so in the end, this is what we have to do. So Casey, this again, when I read your book, Stop Leading Like It's Yesterday, like that's the reason why leadership in schools and teaching and teacher leadership is so vitally important and so life-giving. So the question then is, where are you stuck? Chapter 8 of the book, we get into this expert novice map. How do you move an adaptive challenge forward? An adaptive challenge is just one that requires a shift in mindset, not just a technical solution. And so we go through this mapping exercise because in the end, we get to do this amazing thing, which is to teach. And so I always end my sessions with this, and we can launch from here, Casey, into questions. But I think this is just an encouragement I always like to leave to teachers. And I just imagine if I had John Steinbeck as a student, you never know what your students are going to do when they leave you, but if you had been John Steinbeck's teacher and he'd written about you this way, the poem's like Captured Fireflies, and he writes this, and I just think this is so powerful and so true of what teachers do. And he writes, "She left her signature upon us, the literature of the teacher who writes on children's minds. I've had many teachers who taught us soon forgotten things, but only a few like her who created in me a new thing, a new attitude, a new hunger. I suppose that to a large extent I am the unsigned manuscript of that teacher. What deathless power lies in the hands of such a person." So I love that idea of the unsigned manuscript. And we as teachers are the products of other teachers. We are their unsigned manuscripts, and then we get to go ahead and move that forward with our students. And so that's always a big encouragement to me to think about that as I work with new teachers and as I go back in. I'm going back in next week to teach 3rd grade science with the new NGSS standards because teachers are trying to figure that out, so I'm trying to figure it out with them. I'm working with a bunch of unsigned manuscripts, and I'm not going to have the relationship that that classroom teacher has, but I'm going to help that teacher be a better teacher so that they serve those students more effectively. So the website here, this is where you can find all this stuff. I mean, most of these things are on the website, but, you know, I really do think this is important work, and there's a lot of good work going on out there, and we just need to highlight it and share it. So, KN, yeah, you can definitely, I think you have access to the slides. I think Karen is sharing those in a PDF, so definitely feel free to use the quote. That's one of my favorites. So, and yeah, so you feel free to use it.
And KN, I'm glad you found it interesting and compelling, and I'm going to turn it over to you guys in just a second. But John, I really appreciate that, and I appreciate your referencing "Stop Leading Like It's Yesterday," because my first question kind of relates a little bit to that, because what I wrote about in that book was the fact that, you know, what's cool about what you presented here is I sort of presented the problem. You were thoughtful enough to present a lot of the solution, but the part of the reason why we struggle so much in that crab mentality you talk about is because we've had such a long history that goes right back to the industrial age of a factory mentality. The factory mentality was the genesis of so many of our schools, and it kept us, you know, they in that factory mentality, they didn't want creativity. They didn't want fearlessness that you are talking about. They didn't want envelope pushing and having that sort of passionate, you know, joy. It truly was a monotone economy where many people, 80% of us, went to work in environments where everything that we would pray for our kids just was actually deliberately designed out of them. So, you know, that's what I go into depth in that book and talk about that. And you rightfully are pointing out the fact that we need to get at our creative best, to have that beautiful, wonderful novice mentality that even some of our most veteran teachers can demonstrate. But let's chat a little bit more about how do we allow, and it doesn't have to be just new teachers, but how do we? I think that the slide that talked about how this mindset is spread. But let's chat for a minute about what are some of your ideas about how, if someone is listening to this, how do we create and spread this mindset? What if a teacher feels some of this and wants to pursue some of this, but it really isn't part of their school culture? How do you make it, you know, louder, more intense? How do you get a bigger venue for this kind of sensibility? How do you get this spread?
Sure. I think it's a great question, and I love in your book, talking about the factory model, you had a little vignette about why does algebra come before geometry? It's because algebra was alphabetically before geometry, so we just keep doing these things that are perpetuated without thinking. And so in the end, those really innovative changes that are going to change things in schools, that are going to take it out of the factory model, which we absolutely have to move from and are still locked in so many ways, come from the innovative ideas in classrooms. So you have to have venues like this. You can share ideas with people that are going to push you on your thinking and are going to help you do different things. Your personal learning network, the more time and energy you have to spend on expanding that, the better. But, you know, when you're pressed for time and you're just in survival mode, kind of answering to the tyranny of the urgent in your classroom and the needs of your students, it's very difficult to get outside of that egg crate factory model that you are interchangeable parts that do the same thing for students, because we know that's not true. But if you don't have time to get into other people's classrooms, to talk to them, to plan together, to collaborate, this isn't going to happen. So we need to push hard for that work. Now, the next book, I had the sabbatical this spring, so unlike teachers that do the hard work in K through 12 as higher ed faculty, I got a semester off where I was in high schools for 5 weeks, looking at what's happening in those schools, the way principals and teachers are working together to elevate their practice. And so I was in rural, suburban, and urban high schools, and I saw some phenomenal work going on where principals and teachers are valuing each other's work and getting in with reciprocal observation and getting in with PLCs, doing things, there for one school, they had 2 students going on their retreat to design their school improvement plan for the following year in the spring. So they had the teachers and the principal and students were going to say, here's what we want to work on next year. And that was what was driving everything at that school. And so they were doing some really creative, innovative things that were outside the box, that were meeting the needs of their community, and in some really creative and innovative ways. So we need more of that. The good news is it's happening. I think we need to tell those stories, and I think we need to find little ways to do it as individual teachers, and I think we need to keep pushing the system. And I think the NEA is doing some of that with the Teacher Leadership Initiative. I've done some work with TLI, and I see some great teachers coming together around the country for that. I think there are other places doing this as well. I just think we need to keep pushing that kind of virtual community when we can't get the face-to-face the community, because we have a lot of great work going on out there. It just needs to be elevated and expanded and scaled up.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit more. I like, because it's one thing that I think that newer teachers are going to struggle with is that those communities of practice are emerging everywhere. We've got one right here tonight. And, I hope that some of our participants, maybe they get to know each other and they wind up with new friends and colleagues who they either connect with synchronously or asynchronously. But we've got some people I've had a chance to meet, some of our facilitators, John, in this learning space with ed communities. They're just excellent at creating, at finding those critical thought partners, those critical communities of practice. And they find it through Twitter, they find it through Facebook, they find it through a myriad of other social and other professional learning spaces that'll really, they've become increasingly adroit, and to the point where, I've met some people here in these learning spaces that literally have created a very much like-minded community, held together with digital means. Wherein it's almost like they've got this separate family, so that if you happen to work in an environment that isn't particularly creative, they have their peeps, right? They've got their posse that is creative and is doing some really innovative things. What do you think that does if that trend emerges? And I don't know, our teachers become increasingly engaged in their own communities of practice. Is that taking away from the local school community? Is that something we should embrace? I mean, I think we're going to just see more of it, and I'm just curious as to your perspective and what that could mean for the creative future of local schools if that trend continues.
Yeah, so I work a lot with the Center for Teaching Quality, and they do a lot of this virtual and online stuff. They work with NEA and other partners to elevate the practice of teachers and spread that expertise. And I do think there is a tension between the external teacher leadership development and the internal teacher leadership development that happens in schools if they aren't overlapping and combined in some way. There are times I did a paper on this where you on fellowships, and the way fellowships are great for the teacher leader. They expose them to new ideas and new things and new opportunities, but sometimes it pulls them out of their schools, and they're actually no longer teaching there a year or so after the fellowship. And that may be a gain for the field of education, but it's a loss for the school. And so one of the things I was pushing for in the research I was doing, and it's the first 2 chapters of the book are written. I've got to finish the rest of it. But one of the things I was looking for is how do you do that as a school? And so one of the main factors, and teachers know this, the principal is not the catalyst for everything, but they're a key support or constraint to any kind of work that's going on. So having a leadership team of teachers, administrators, the people that really do and I'm conceiving of leadership as work and the functions that go with that, not positions or personalities or that type of thing, but it's the work that needs to be done. If the leadership work that's moving forward the organizational goals of the school are clearly articulated, and people are going out and finding the people that support them, whether virtually or in person, in meaningful ways, that work just needs to come back together to move the mission of the school forward. And so those virtual networks should, in essence, just spread the learning that's going in to inform what the school's doing as a whole. There just needs to be some built-in opportunity through PLCs or other mechanisms to share what's being learned and brought back to the school. if we continue in silos in the school and teachers are advancing and making this progress with virtual partners and don't have any venue to share, then that doesn't ultimately help the school as much as it could if some of that was coordinated and shared among teams in the school. So that's kind of the work, because I had the same question, Casey, and that's why I took on this study of how you actually scale this up as a leadership initiative in schools, so that you systematically improve schools, not just improve individual teachers and individual classrooms.
You know, and I think you're right on with that whole notion, and I want to make sure our audience didn't miss it, because I think it's so important. And you said a lot there, but one of the things that you talked about was the fact that leadership in schools today doesn't have to be limited to positional authority. The notion that leadership is an available force, a force of innovation that is dynamically available. I can see, you know, KN wrote about the issue that you know, time constraints and leadership acceptance. There are certainly those institutions where, you know, it's just more comfortable for the leader to think of the school as the Eckert, and obviously it's time constraints keep teachers from being probably as creative and effective as they like. But truly, in a dynamic world where we're finding each other, I think the opportunities to innovate really without permission are pretty dynamic. I want to turn over, and John, you can maybe respond to that in a second, but before you do, audience, I'd love it if anything you've heard tonight inspired a question. Don't even worry if it's totally out of context. Now's the time. Go ahead and think about a question or two you might have for Jonathan based on what you're hearing. But any response to what I just said there before they get into it?
No, I think that's exactly right. KN has put in here, proceed until apprehended. I think that's true. I think that's a hard one. That's a hard one for new teachers that don't have tenure. They have to be more careful. But as veterans, I do think we have latitude to push things forward when we know they're in the best interest of students. And in the end, that innovation is what's got to drive things, because we're the ones that are in there with kids. And the work we're doing there has to be moved forward and spread beyond just our classroom. So,
sure.
Yeah, so it does go well with fearless practice. And you can't almost always ask forgiveness. I did almost burn down my science lab once, which I could have asked forgiveness for, but I might have been out of a job due to a stupid mistake. So that had to do with the lava lamp picture earlier. But yeah, you're right, KN. You usually can't ask for forgiveness. Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Well, that story is definitely in the book if you ever come across it.
Well, that notion that you know, I guess one of the things I think about that, you know, in terms of even asking permission, and please go ahead and guys keep asking your questions. I'll just jump in really quickly, but when it comes to so much of these reflections, I guess. And respond to this, disagree, but it seems like an awful lot of the decisions that you can make in the classroom, you know, revert right back to the things related to teaching and learning. That's where, you know, and for the most part, those are decisions you make day by day, and for the most part, there isn't even the opportunity for oversight. So I think sometimes we can, with good intentions in the classroom today, we can overstate perhaps the influence and even, frankly, the ability to materially observe what's going on in your classroom. And, you know, you getting creative in the classroom, truly, there's probably more of a license for that, and maybe teachers are aware. What do you think, then?
No, I think that's true. I know in elementary schools, teachers are feeling more and more constrained, and I tell a story in the first chapter about two different beginning teachers, one who has latitude to do all kinds of creative things. He's got his own class economy. He's got I won't go into details there, but he's a fabulous teacher, doing really great things, has a great principal, has wide latitude. But the scripted, so the KN is talking about the scripted curriculum and the expectation to be on the same given page each day. That has become more and more prevalent, and I think that's something we really have to fight against, because I don't know beginning teachers who I want to be teaching get really excited about scripted curriculum. Like I think it's great for a beginning teacher to have a lot of resources, and if you're allowed to go off script, that's fine. But I think that's a troubling move. I do think that there is latitude in classrooms, especially if you have K-Ann's attitude of asking forgiveness. But I do think there are a lot of times where there is more latitude, and so the student that I gave that had no constraints, she would get weekly visits from a coach or an administrator, and when she was doing Think, Pair, Share with her students, she was getting this kind of feedback where she said the person would say, well, you gave them 30 seconds to talk in their Think, Pair, Share. I think you should give them 45 seconds. And I think you should assign a student A and a student B. Student A should go first the first time, and the next time you do Think, Pair, Share, student B should go first. It's kind of micromanaging that feels really, really constraining. But I think what happens, and I read about this in the book, is you establish your credibility as a teacher, and you're seen as knowing what you're doing, and you have evidence that you're an effective teacher, and if you make that case, then most of the time you get increasing latitude. And so we need those teachers that have that latitude to take advantage of that latitude, to make space for those teachers who don't feel like they have it. And so that's my encouragement, that we need to push back against that, because in the end, teacher-proofed curriculum doesn't exist. It's not encouraging in the profession. It doesn't treat teachers like the professionals that they are. And so if personalized learning becomes kind of code for scripting the teacher out of the classroom, then I think we have big issues. And so I think we need to fight that as much as we can. So I don't know if that hits your question, Casey, but I kind of took what K-Ann said and just went with that.
No, I totally agree. I think scripted curriculum is great for teaching. It's just lousy for learning. I mean, it's great if you had a script for a play. If you had handed a script for a play and you'd know but it's just not, kids certainly don't learn in a way that's predictable like that. It's almost as if you can assume that every kid is going to respond exactly the same way, which we know is absolutely not the case. But it's creating, though, the resilience, because when I hear about that kind of approach, I mean we're talking about in the 1920s. There were, I think in your part of the woods, there was some famous Chicago area superintendents that would brag that they were going to walk down the hallway and every third grade teacher in every class would be on the same page. I mean, they literally in the Industrial Revolution wanted that kind of control. And the idea that in 2017 we're going to be in the same place is kind of mind-boggling, really.
It is, especially when you see all the push for differentiation and all. It's like, how does this go together? Like, we want teachers giving the same assessment on the same day. I mean, in D.C., in Washington, D.C., they give tests on the same day. They have the next day, they have the same release time to discuss this and then make changes. I mean, every teacher in the district should be moving at the same pace based on the assessment plan. And I love your line that it's good for teaching. It's just bad for learning. Like, yeah, I mean, it's good for teaching in that I guess you don't have to think, but in the end, that's not teaching. Like, that's nobody. Who do you want in the profession that doesn't want to have to think about what they're doing? And I find that, just really troubling, especially as we prepare new teachers.
But this is part of our mission as teachers, though, John. I think that as much as difficult as it is, this is part of our mission is hammering this out. I mean, the fact that we're never going to move away from the notion that we're going to be measured. That's just the way it is. But part of our job as educators is going to be to fight these battles and to remain vigilant and stay creative and stay. I guess I still remain entirely optimistic, because we've never had. Think about how many more resources we have today to connect with one another, to get evidence. I mean, a brand new teacher today can certainly gather a lot more evidence to go to, frankly, to as a retort to some of these things than they ever could before.
Well, and we know way more about learning. I mean, even if you just read John Hattie's stuff, you would have such a leg up on teachers, 20 years ago. We know so much more about how to engage students well and meaningfully. And I'm in the book. There's a section on that. I I was teaching in Tennessee, and so we've had value-added test scores in Tennessee since 1993, which value-added a bad word a lot of places, and it does oversimplify the complexities of teaching in a lot of ways. But I had huge latitude as a seventh grade science teacher because my principal, whether it was true or not was irrelevant, believed that I had the highest value-added scores of any teacher in the state. And so I could do whatever I wanted. So I was a huge fan of that because I would finish teaching what Tennessee expected me to teach by the middle of February. I would then teach my students all the additional science that I thought they needed to know that wasn't addressed in the Tennessee Science Standards. A week before the April exam in the state, we'd do a week-long review, and then we go back to the stuff we were doing. And I could do that because of my value-added score. So I don't think the accountability system is always, now I had relatively easy students to teach and relatively easy standards and relatively easy tests. But KN is the problem with BAM is half the teachers and students must be below average. That's absolutely, I've written on this extensively. What my students doing well does to the 8th grade teacher that follows me. There's big problems with it. So certainly not advocating for it, but you can figure out ways to work in the system to push things ahead that are best for students. But sometimes you have to come out and say, hey, this doesn't work, or this does work, and this is what our students need. And that's where I remain optimistic because my hope is in the teachers in the schools. That's why I went back to this slide. The mindset is it starts with hopefulness. If we lose that, then there's not much left for us in teaching.
Well, and I don't know. I'll remain optimistic. I mean, I began my teaching career, John, not even, I wouldn't be in a position to retire. I'm still very much in my profession. And I remember very early in my career that there were very few questions about competency. There were very few questions. The era of accountability was just getting started. So sometimes I think when we look at our problems and we think, are we dealing with better problems than we did before? And I think the answer is yes. I'd rather be struggling with figuring out the best way to add value and to measure it and to really keep getting better than to frankly be generally unaware, which I think 25 years ago at least, we were in many places sadly in that place. So I don't know, keeping a novice mindset will keep you fresh and keep you hopeful and persistent and resilient and curious and all those good things, John. Is there anything, any other thing that any last takeaways that you hope? I mean, if you had it your way and we had a novice mindset in our schools, is there anything else that we didn't have a chance to chat about that was really important to this concept you'd like to leave us with?
Well, it really just builds off what you just said. I mean, I think the Every Student Succeeds Act offers some flexibility where I think the great ideas in the classroom need to bubble up to drive and improve what's going on in schools. So your point about we have better problems to deal with, I think that's true. I mean, we have an opportunity here for great teachers to lead with their ideas. And so my bet is always there. This book is all about that bet. Teachers sharing their great ideas and moving them forward in transparent and vulnerable ways, not saying everything works all the time, but here's what didn't work, here's what does work now, here's what I'm learning, what are you learning? And this reciprocal give and take I'm really encouraged about. That's why I'm always happy to do these kinds of things with whomever is willing to talk about ideas because we always learn a lot from each other. So I've enjoyed talking to you and reading your stuff, and hopefully this is helpful for pushing some of those ideas forward. But that's where my hope lies, is with the teachers in our country and the good things they're doing and just spreading more of that work.
Well, that is where the action is happening, right in the classroom, and I can't imagine closing it in any better place than that. So, John, thanks so much for joining us, and ladies and gentlemen listening now and later, thank you for your attention. We really appreciate your great questions, your great input. Please check out his book. It's going to be The Novice Advantage by Colin Press, Fearless Practice for Every Teacher, and we certainly need more of that. So, John, thank you so much, and again, all of our guests, thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Great.